Welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to take a moment and press pause to reflect back after the COVID sprint. While we certainly aren't completely past the pandemic, we've reached a point where a lot of businesses are stopping to take a look at the lessons learned and the experiences they've gleaned over the last year. I'm joined today by Jason Prokop and Alesia Magon, both of DiaSorin. Jason and Alesia, welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Let's start with some introductions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about DiaSorin, your roles, and anything you'd like to share about your backgrounds. Alesia, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Alesia Magon, as Sarah mentioned, and I'm the Senior Manager of Technical Support in the Repair Center at DiaSorin. I'll let Jason describe DiaSorin to you in a little bit of a global sense, but what I'm responsible for is the 24/7 technical support team at DiaSorin Inc. Across US and Canada, as well as the repair depot and internal service for our equipment that we have here at the DiaSorin Inc. site.
Excellent. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about DiaSorin and your role?
Yes, hi, I'm Jason Prokop. I'm the Director of Service and Support here at DiaSorin Inc. out of Stillwater, Minnesota. So I'm responsible and our team's responsible for the field service across the United States. And we also have a subsidiary up in Canada. We directly manage our customers' install base. So we do preventative maintenance, repairs, etc. So DiaSorin is a global manufacturer of immunodiagnostics products. We're a very multi-international company from that perspective, and we really specialize in specialty diagnostics. That's why if you see our brand, DiaSorin's called the diagnostic specialist from that perspective. So we try to come out with niche and innovative products that fit gaps in our customers' needs from that perspective.
Okay, great. So I wrote an article, I believe it was late 2020, and it was my love letter to the service industry for surviving such a crazy year. And Alesia, you actually reached out to me after coming across that article and saying, hey, this really resonated. And I think that we experienced a lot of this and we have some interesting stuff to share. So here we are. So can you tell us a little bit what about that article resonated most with you?
Yeah, during the pandemic, there was a lot of news and media about the frontline workers, as there should have been. That's completely appropriate. And there was people, many industries and types of people that were serving the communities that weren't as readily noticed. And when I read that article, I thought, absolutely, yes, this is the love letter to the people in this community, in the community of the service industry that are trying to help in their own retrospective ways for the customers that they serve. And thinking specifically about the service industry at DiaSorin, I thought, yes, this is what we went through. We had unbelievable challenges, but we had a lot of lessons where we learned about perseverance and we learned about how to stay strong. And you wrote and touched on several of those points in the letters. And I shared it on LinkedIn as an effort of expressing the same level of gratitude back to the service department that we represent.
Yeah, you make a really good point, which is there's many layers and types of essential workers, right? So, some that have experienced maybe, different things firsthand, like those that are on the front lines in the healthcare industry, certainly, I think deserve to be top of mind when you think about, what this last year has looked like. But to your point, there's a lot of things that are a little bit more behind the scenes and a lot of people that have worked really hard to serve those frontline workers and to make sure that those frontline workers have been able to do everything that they needed to do for patients and for people that have been impacted most. And I think that that's a really, really good point. Now, DiaSorin, being in the industry that you're in, just so happened to be in a position to provide testing for COVID, and therefore, had maybe a doubly crazy year last year because you experienced some really intense growth. So Jason, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what's the core business? So what were you kind of up to before COVID hit? And then what has that growth looked like? How did you sort of pivot and start providing that testing, and what did that kind of mean in terms of the impact on the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So pre-COVID, it was typical business as usual for our organization. We had our national commercial meeting laid out at the end of February, where we were given our strategic objectives of an organization with the products that we were going to come out with and launch, and what our focus was going to be for 2020. So we were all out on our plan. Everybody, all the information was cascaded to everybody in the commercial organization as well as internally. And then come mid-March, things change.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in midst of the pandemic. So as an organization, and we're very innovative from that perspective, we saw what was needed in the marketplace. So we quickly, our molecular colleagues out in California came up with a PCR test for COVID. And then our global colleagues in Italy and internally here in Stillwater came out with some immunoassays, both for IgG and antigen testing. Now we have another IgG testing for post-vaccination from that aspect. So then we saw much interest in the marketplace because, no vendor was ready with the supply to meet the demand from our customers. So then we quickly had to collaborate with all of our colleagues, both from a corporate level and in the US, as well as our instrument manufacturers, to look what we could do with our supply to meet the demand of the public. And I think from that, we saw the communication across our organizations really increase, even though we're in this virtual setting from that perspective. We all had to communicate with one another on a daily basis to make sure that we could get done what we needed to get done for the organization, as well as our communities and society from that perspective.
Okay. So is there can you give us kind of a baseline to think about, like, okay, before COVID, we were producing X units, or we, how much did that really boom the business, and like a scale for what you had to adjust to?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit from an instrument standpoint. So from a molecular standpoint, our install base more than doubled in 2020. And from immuno standpoint, we had a couple months where we installed more instruments than we ever have in the history of the time that I've been with the organization, and I've been here almost 27 years from that. I think from an immuno side, in 1 month, we installed over 50 instruments in May, I believe. And typically we do maybe 10 a month. So it was all hands on deck to get our customers the instrumentation and the testing they needed to keep up with their demand that they had.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, we think about, I think a lot of times when you talk about reacting to change, you think about it in the negative sense, right? So like, a lot of the organizations we've had conversations with around COVID, unfortunately, what that looked like for them was a significant reduction in business, and, some people had to make layoffs, and, so, I think there's this perception of the challenges of COVID being more on the side of that contraction. But I think it's just interesting to point out that challenges can also come in the form of opportunity, right? So, I mean, let's set aside the fact that you're all employees of DiaSorin, and DiaSorin now has this opportunity to provide this testing in this time that it's needed, which obviously has a growth impact on the business. But you're all still human beings dealing with the same, fear and uncertainty and trepidation in your own lives, right? But there's also a real business aspect of like, oh my gosh, like we have the chance to step in and do this thing, and being able to do it, right? I think the recognition of the opportunity is one thing, but the ability to pull together quickly as a company and execute on that opportunity is a totally different thing. So I think, kudos to you guys as an organization for, being able to see where you could have an impact, and, get to work doing what needs to be done, in community. You're talking about a global company, right? So all of that communication, the logistics, everything. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But, I think the other thing that's interesting to look at here is, not only was it a really hard year in many ways, even though for you guys that meant really, really rapid growth. During that, you ended up with the strongest NPS score that you've had since you started measuring it. So how? Like, how did you do that? And why do you think, that is, or how do you think that was accomplished?
And I can speak to that. So if I look at it from my perspective, it's all about the great people that we have within our organization. And I'm just not talking about all of our people in field service from that perspective, but that's internally across all of our organizations. Everybody stepped up. Did we all have some anxiety? Absolutely. I think everybody in society had some anxiety about stuff, but we also knew that we were doing something different and really making a difference from that perspective. So all the people across the organization really stepped up, both internally and in the field. And I think our customers saw that. They saw us as an organization that's going to continue to provide excellent customer support, innovative products to meet the needs that they have at this time in a very quick and nimble fashion. And nobody ever stopped. I mean, whatever we asked people to do, of course, everybody had a little anxiety about it, and we were empathetic to that for sure, because we had the same type of anxiety. But they knew that they were doing the best they could for our organization as well as the customers out there. And all the people within the organization deserve all the credit. And I think we have some of the best people of any organization that's out there.
Yeah.
I would definitely add to that, Sarah, that, the industry was calling, we saw it in the media everywhere. We need more testing. People were saying it was March, the middle of March, when the US really became impacted by the pandemic. And the number one response was more testing, more testing, more testing. And our organization, a lot of great people within this company who are very innovative in the scientific industry were able to come up with that solution. And the customer saw that DiaSorin is a solution provider, right? So we're able to come up with the plans. There was a lot of shortages of a lot of things, but testing was one of the things that was most talked about. And when we did that, and then you couple it with something that we were already providing before, but our employees dug deep and did it even better this year, was we really provided that customer support. And that's not just like the frontline people who are talking to the customer, although they are extremely valuable to that, being the face of DiaSorin. It was the people who were staying late and making sure that everything was received on time. It was the people who were processing the orders when they didn't necessarily have to. It was the people who were taking care of their children at home while still working. I mean, it was a lot of people who had to do things that they've never done before, but realizing the importance of why they did that. And it was visible to our customers. And we were able to say, when they were saying to us, I'm having to show up in the lab and to do the testing, we were saying, and we're side by side with you, we're helping you, you know,
Mhm.
and they saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the people part of this too. And I think that's the most important part. But before we do that, I want to talk about the logistics, the operations of things, right? So, you know, in this case, you're talking about growth that was spawned by this crazy once in a lifetime, hopefully, event, you know, happening, right? But any company that experiences really, really rapid, big growth, you know, struggles with how to scale and how to react quickly and nimbly to accommodate that. So, you know, I think there's a message here, not just, you know, we grew so much because of COVID, but just we experienced this rapid growth period. And here's how we adjusted our business operations to be able to navigate that. So can you guys talk a little bit about, you know, some of the areas of operations and how you sort of made some changes and pivots to be able to, you know, react and respond to the opportunity that was there?
Yeah. Yeah, there was quite a few of those moments. So starting on day one, after we realized what was happening was about the safety of our employees and what we were going to do. So what do we need to implement in order to get people safe? So for technical support, it meant you're working from home immediately. Well, that meant that we had to set up their home offices and structure their home offices and ensure that there was business continuity with the phone lines. And we had to ensure that there was no major disruptions. Other companies experienced that too. Our customers saw no difference on any of our phone support whatsoever. From a repair center perspective, where we had people who were having to work here at the office in order to accommodate the needs, it was making sure they had the right PPE, that they had the right safety protocols. It was moving things around in the space and the lab so that they were able to do that. It was making sure that we had procedures that they could all have their own laptops where they were making sure that they were reading them without touching other people. It was making sure their badges were only allowing them into certain areas. There was a lot of things that we did in order to say, okay, first is your safety and how are we going to do that? And from a field perspective, we did that as well. And Jason can talk a little bit about the safety that we did for the field service employees.
Yeah, and that was working very closely with our corporate colleagues as well as internally with our health and safety teams and stuff like that. Because you know how it went from a PPE perspective, where now everybody needs masks and there's no masks available. You're trying to find lab coats, you're looking for gloves. We're looking to make sure that we could find alternate suppliers than our base suppliers to make sure that we had a backup in case of need from that perspective. And we had to work with our corporate colleagues and up in Canada to make, because then now we can't ship stuff across the border from that perspective if it was PPE. So a lot of that comes back to that communication that we had within our team. So that really helped us get ready for that. And then we, even to keep up with demand, we had to hire some new headcount to make sure that we had enough people in place. And then, as Allie said, we had to look at social distancing between our confined space to make sure that we could keep people a safe distance apart. And then we had to look at alternate shifts that people could work as well. We had people in the field that had daycare needs, so they decided instead of working their normal 8 to 5, that they would work 5 to 1 p.m. to be able to take care of their customers still. And that's kind of the ownership that we see from our service department, as well as all of our departments internally, is that they really owned the situation and were very accountable for everything that needed to happen from that
Yeah, and you know, a lot of those pivotal operational things, you know, headcount shifts, safety, working with colleagues around the world, you know, they seem at a glance like something that you could breeze over, but they took several hours of conversation to figure out how are we going to do this and how are we.
At least I would think. I mean, and it's easy to kind of look back. They say like rose-colored glasses or what have you, but the other thing is in those very early stages, the circumstances were changing almost every day, right? So it's like you figure it out once and then you get going, and then next week it's different, and then you figure it out again, and then so it wasn't like we've kind of, as this has gone on, we've fallen into a norm. It's not the norm anyone wants, but we've kind of reached a more level state. But in the beginning, I mean, it was different, requirements and regulations and stipulations being introduced, really all the time. So I think the attention to detail, and again, that level of cross-functional and regional communication, is really important in being able to, make the changes you guys did and continuing refining them, as you went along. Any other things to note in terms of logistically or operationally, how you guys kind of accommodated the growth?
The main logistics points when it came to servicing were really about working, when it comes down to like the nuts and bolts, besides the staffing and how we had to manage that, was about the logistics of the parts, the logistics of the instrumentation. And we really had to collaborate and communicate much differently to our corporate colleagues, in the way that it wasn't that we were speaking about things differently, but we had to speak about things much more rapidly. So instead of weekly communications, it was daily communications, because guess what? Today we need this. And they had to say, okay, now we need to gather up the people here that need to help with that. We need to talk to our suppliers. They need to talk to their suppliers. Who's our alternate suppliers? Where are we getting it? How are they going to be imported? How are they going to be exported? And there were so many meetings where we just had to come up with those solutions very quickly and get the right stakeholders in place immediately. And there wasn't a person who didn't try to respond to that need. But the logistics of service, although PPE was something that many organizations were contending to get at that time, it's also a lot of those parts require special metalling, special people who are working on manufacturing lines that, all were impacted by COVID as well. And when those production lines were shut down because of a potential COVID case, which did happen multiple times, we had to think about, okay, now what are we going to do in the supply chain, and how are we going to react? And that was, something that, we tried to make sure did not impact the customer. We were going to do everything that we could as an organization to make that transparent to the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we had such an increase in our install base, I mean, what we had to keep from an inventory standpoint from spare parts to be able to service our customers, like you said, it changed in a month. We would have to manage our reorder points and everything, and what our consumption is, pretty much on a weekly basis, to keep up with the growing install base that we were having, because we need to make sure we're supporting them in the best possible way that we can. Did we have some challenges? Of course we did. I think every manufacturer that's out there had some challenges from that perspective, but I think we, through a lot of dedication and commitment of our people, we made our way through it quite well.
Yeah. So thinking about reacting to this, if you look at it from the business perspective, you're talking about being more nimble, more flexible, more creative, more probably organized, more, all of the things. What would you each say is the biggest lesson, business-wise, that you've learned that you think you'll carry into the future? Like, out of this experience, what's the one thing that you think will kind of persist?
For me, from a personal perspective, right? It's just, yeah. So for me, I would say that I really just want to continue to look at employees' individual situations with the business needs because, not just during COVID, but other times, people have various challenges and
Mhm.
you have to be able to say, okay, how can we respectfully accommodate those needs and still meet what the objectives are of the organization? So that's one important thing, but retaining being nimble, it's how to communicate with the other people. I know we've said that word multiple times, but really that was one of the things that came out is we realized, okay, well, forget the phone call. Now we're going to do a video chat.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to chat you all day long about little individual things in order to, get the end goal done. And when we're being nimble with the solution, it's okay. So this is the way we've always done it. We've now proved to, some people who have hesitation about that change that we can do it and we can
Mhm.
be just as effective and we can be just as efficient, and let's figure out a way to get through it. And I think a lot more open-mindedness is definitely come out as a result of the COVID experience.
Yeah. Jason, what would you add?
Mine would be similar from that perspective. As leaders within the organization and being, we manage a lot of field-based staff from that perspective. We want to make sure that they're still engaged from that aspect. And we used to have a lot of regional meetings, go to customer sites and visit, and now we don't have the opportunity to do that. So we're continuing to look at ways that we can keep people engaged from that perspective, where it used to be, well, we'll have 3 regional meetings, we'll go visit some customer sites. Now we have to look at alternative ways that we can keep all of our employees engaged from that perspective. And I think we've been okay at it, but we still have some work to do from that perspective because it's hard to be as engaged as you can be when you're talking through a video monitor or
Mhm.
on the phone from that aspect. I also think that from this and the virtual environment, when we look at jobs that can be done remote via all the time, or at least provide our employees that flexibility when they have personal needs to be able to work from home. I think from an executive level and leadership level with the organization, with the tremendous job that everybody did this year, there's a lot more trust in that
Mhm.
aspect. Where, the old school mentality is if you're not in the building and you didn't punch your time card, I don't really know what you're doing.
Right.
I think we actually saw our productivity probably increase with a lot of people working remotely.
Mhm.
Probably a little less distractions, probably a little less meetings being called that
Mhm.
you really didn't need to go to, but people spent half the day in meetings rather than utilizing that time in a value-added activity. So I think that's going to help us in the long run for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the fact that your people was the biggest key to being able to survive and thrive over the last year in terms of the business. So you guys have mentioned, I think, one of the important pieces, which is there seems to be this pulling together because everyone realized they were working toward a common good, right? So
Mhm.
you were navigating this growth because you were doing something that was having a direct impact on, this life experience that we were all having. Alesia, talk a little bit about, that kind of interconnectivity and how you think that played a role in people's commitment to, working harder or doing whatever it takes to, scale up the way you did and to meet the outcomes that you needed to for your customers.
Yeah, for sure. There's very few experiences that one goes through in a lifetime or even generations in which we all can say we experienced the same thing at the same time. And that in itself creates a connection between the people, right? So that's, it's not the weather that we're talking about because maybe we're all experiencing the weather that day, but we're talking about how this is impacting us. But it's impacting us in real ways, like real ways where maybe you're not seeing your grandmother for, months and months at a time, or your mother you have to take care of, or you're nervous about the fact that your child didn't have childcare, or even, people who had come with just very unique life experiences that seemed heavier than normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what made it different was that a lot of people were having that same feeling
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And it was a result of this, like what it meant to be stuck in your home for several months. Or for me, I'm in the same building as a part of my team, and I couldn't even see them for some months. I had to talk to them virtually, even though we were in the same building.
Mm-hmm.
All of those sort of things really impacted people's moods, right? And it should have, and it did. And we're all human, but one of the things that meant was, okay, I'm having this challenge in my life. And my colleague in Italy, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, my colleague who lives in Massachusetts or California, they were all kind of experiencing that. So when I
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, today is a harder day for me, or that employee said that, we were all saying that. And then you still saw your colleague next to you digging deep and trying hard and working the longer hours, or taking a rest when they needed a rest, and you're covering for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they said, you know what, I need this day off. I have bereavement, I have COVID leave. And when that happened, people said, okay, I will do more,
Mm-hmm.
because their turn was coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of knew that. And the people who didn't have those turns I saw a lot of gratitude and feeling fortunate for that. And I still see, a lot of us feeling connected. Oh, I see that, Italy is closed down again, for instance, last week.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been really hard on Easter not to be able to see your family. Oh, that, yes, that was. Or, for all the other, holidays that were going on, and then people didn't get to see their families. There was,
Mm-hmm.
and then we were saying, and when you can work, please come in and help. And people,
Mm-hmm.
and they replied to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think there's definitely this sense of deeper human connection to one another after the last year. I think that that's the one thing that I hope out of all of this sticks, if anything, because I think that we've all, we just view things differently. And I think it makes us kinder to one another. I think it makes people, I'm not a patient person, so I'm not saying like ultimately patient, but like a little bit more patient, and just, like I said, a little bit more considerate of what someone else is going through, knowing that we're all going through something, and I do hope that is something that we cannot dismiss when we do get back to, an increased sense of normal, because it is really easy to be kind of, wrapped in your own world and your own experiences. But I think this connection that we all have to one another, has been one of the biggest positives out of, a really bad situation. So I love the fact that you guys had such a positive response from your teams in terms of that banding together and working toward a common good. I know we talked before about how important empathy was in leadership over the last year. Can you guys maybe talk a little bit or give an example about how you have, employed empathy with your teams throughout this experience?
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the most important things that we did as an organization from that perspective, because we're all experiencing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The first part was really listening to them, because we're not all in the same situation. Everybody has personal challenges that they have to go through from that perspective, and we all understand that. And we listened to all those situations from that aspect. We had COVID situations that happened amongst our teams. And what we kind of really found from that is the teamwork amongst the regions and departments that we have within the organization, um, that's where I really saw a positive change, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody was going through the same thing. Okay, so and so has COVID. I can take his spot for a little bit. I'm going to go step in, and without any hesitation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the biggest thing that we really had was listening. We all had anxiety about what was going on, specifically at the beginning of the pandemic. I think that anxiety is lessened a little bit, but everybody still has a little bit of that out there for sure. But really just listening to what their needs are. If you have to take time off, it's okay. We'll figure it out. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody else would just step up from a team aspect to get done what needed to get done.
Mhm.
Alicia, what would you add?
I mean, empathy is a word that has gotten thrown around quite a lot. Like, you know, if you're a servant leader, then you're going to be empathetic towards your employees. But like, what does that mean to really show empathy for one situation is to be the other words that we described. Empathy for someone's situation is also to say, we can be creative in this situation and we can allow for that to happen. And for those reasons, there was huge kudos to the HR and executive team at DiaSorin because they allowed the managers to express that creativity for the one's roles. And it didn't have to be broad streaking policies that there were, of course we have policies, that's not the point, but they
Right.
weren't so broad streaking that it didn't allow the manager to express that empathy in a very specific way. And you know, I think that the other thing is that when you do show empathy for the employees, it's a double empathy. They show empathy for you because, you know, there was multiple days where I had, you know, bad days too. I was experiencing some hardships too. And
Mm-hmm.
my employees said, it's okay. You know, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be perfect today. You know, we're not expecting more from you today. And, you know, that sort of thing, again, going back to the human side of what COVID left. I mean, we were asked to be, like you said, sprinters
Mm-hmm.
of this experience. We were asked to sprint through months and months and months of work. And we were asked to live during this time as well. And they were sometimes contradicting one another, but that empathy portion of it, how to express it, not just how to listen and not only to just say, I am empathetic, but to be
Mm-hmm.
empathetic, was something that we were able to do this year, and both from an employee side and from a managerial side.
Yeah. I think you know, we've had a number of conversations now on this podcast about the reality of leading by example when it comes to vulnerability, and, you know, normalizing conversations or making employees feel comfortable saying like, hey, I'm struggling, I need a break, or I, you know, I have this going on. You know, there's, you know, certain people, certain situations where it's really hard for folks to speak up or to feel comfortable, you know, or not scared, right? Of, well, what's the reaction going to be? Like, should I just force my way through it or what have you? And related to COVID and not, you know, and I think that, you know, we've had some really good conversations about if you can figure out appropriate ways as a leader to show a little bit of your own humanity and be a little bit vulnerable with your teams, then it shows them that it's okay to do the same thing. And I think that's a good thing. The other thing I think, Jason, you mentioned earlier, you know, some of the field technicians were able to switch their schedules from 8 to 5 to 5 to 1, right? And that might sound like a really small adjustment, but I mean, for a lot of people, that probably made the difference of, you know, their spouse not needing to leave their job, or, you know, their family not losing an income, or, you know, it's just the amount of stress that situation in and of itself, you know, people that had kids that couldn't be in childcare or in school that were, you know, both working. I mean, we've also talked on here and have relayed a lot of statistics about, the number of women that have had to leave the workforce in the past year because of that situation. So those are real, tangible things that you can do, right? There are concessions you can make, changes you can make that don't detract from that employee's ability to do their job, but are just a different way than the norm that allows them flexibility that probably was priceless to them. Do you know what I mean? And to me, that is what empathy is really about, is taking action on what those needs are and finding a way to, have that common ground. And I think that, throughout this conversation, you guys have said again and again, like how much your employees cared and how much they wanted to pull together.
Mhm.
And that's a two-way street, right? If DiaSorin wasn't wanting to hear what those needs are and make adjustments and be creative, those people may not feel as passionate about, their part in everything, and vice versa. The more you saw them respond and the harder that they wanted to contribute, the more they wanted to contribute, the more you valued their contribution and thought, okay, we need to make this work. Like there has to be a way to achieve the right outcomes for everyone. So I think that it's a really good illustration of what needs to happen in that give and take with valuable employees, and just thinking, Jason, to your point about not being stuck in the old way of doing things, or some of those thinkings that maybe, over the last year, the companies kind of realized, yeah, we felt that way, but it's not proven to be accurate. So yeah, I think that's those are really good examples. And I think that it's a really cool story you guys have about how the company has come together, how the employees have contributed, and how you've made it through hopefully the hardest part of the sprint, and now you can breathe a little bit at least. So just one last question in terms of like, what are your final thoughts in terms of, the biggest lesson you've learned, the biggest takeaway you have from this whole experience?
The biggest takeaway that I have is that there's two things. One is that we're strong and capable, and we're able to do things. So, I shared with you once before in a conversation, my son learned how to play piano virtually this entire year. I would have never thought that possible. Okay, so there's a lot that we can do that we never thought that we would be able to do, and we walked away with it. And like, don't self-limit, right? And then the other piece of that is that although the virtual is great and there's a lot to it, the other piece that I've learned is how much I enjoy just being around people and what kind of energy that brings and can bring to an environment. So, when there is more people around and in the office, and you're able to communicate with them face to face, or you're able to have a meeting with somebody who's experiencing something and you want to have that meeting face to face, there's nothing that really replaces that. And I don't really want to replace that. So although I'm able to do things in a lot of different ways, I want to always be able to carve out time to do things face to face when we can. So
yeah, that makes sense. Jason, what about you?
Kind of what I learned from this is, if we have the right people in place across the organization, as Ali said, we can do it. When we had to ramp up, not only from a manufacturing and service and installation aspect, it almost sounded like it was impossible to get all the stuff done that we needed to get done. But then we really saw how good the people that we have within the organization and how committed and dedicated they were to the group, which makes me very proud to work with the team that I work with, as well as everybody else across our entire organization from that The other piece is kind of like Allie's, is I really miss the face-to-face.
Mhm.
I'm okay with the virtual, but it's just not the same. So
Yeah.
I can't wait till we're back to a little bit of normalcy so I can get the field team together and we can have a regional meetings and have face-to-face discussions and continue to build our relationships from that perspective and
Mhm.
hopefully sit at the bar and have a beer or something like that as well, because uh, we can really do a lot to build relationships in a face-to-face setting that I truly miss. I miss going to our customer sites,
Mhm.
miss seeing all of our colleagues in the field as well as internationally. So I hope everything continues to whatever the new norm is.
Mhm.
The quicker we get there, the better from my perspective.
Yeah. I'm with you on the face-to-face. I've been, I work from home as my norm, so pre-COVID, but I always traveled a lot. And so it's still been a big adjustment in terms of, I really enjoy getting together with, colleagues and people in the industry and going to events and all of that. And I really miss it. So I'm with you guys on that. I think, there's something to be said for a little bit more flexibility or hybrid situations and certain things that, really don't need to always be done on a location or in an office, but there's just certain aspects of, this that really are better in person. So hopefully, I'd say I'm counting down until the next time I have a beer at a cocktail hour at an industry event, but I don't know when that will be. So I can't be counting, but I'm very much looking forward to it. So, well,
Absolutely.
thank you both so much for being here and sharing your story. I think it's a very, very impressive feat that you guys have accomplished. And, it definitely sounds like there's been some really good lessons that have come out of it. And, if we had to go through it, then that's all we can ask. So thanks for coming on and sharing them with us.
Thanks for having us. It's been a great conversation.
All right, great. You can check out more by visiting us at futureoffieldservice.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn as well as Twitter at The Future of FS. The Future of Field Service podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more about IFS solutions by visiting ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.